So while they're making their way up here, I will read a little thing that I found. Amendment 3 in Missouri was passed with 53% of the vote in November, making Missouri the 21st state to legalize recreational marijuana, making it legal for anyone older than 21 to buy, possess, deliver, use, manufacture, and sell marijuana in the state. It also sets the stage for thousands of Missourians to have their criminal records expunged.
Do you all want chairs, or do you want to just answer questions as they come up? I'll grab a chair. If that's okay.
I'd sort of say I don't care to get one.
I'll grab one whenever you get started. I have some actual questions. Do you all want me to ask a question first, or do you have a statement that you want to make first? How do you prefer? You can do questions. Questions? Okay. So whenever you come up to answer a question, will you try to repeat the question first? Back since we already. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to have some structured questions, but if you have questions in the audience that you want to answer or want answered, please raise your hand and we'll try to fit those in as well. So, Kimberly, this one might be more for you.
Okay.
What am I not allowed to do under Amendment 13?
Sure.
Hi everyone, I'm Kimber Monroe. I'm a local attorney here in Farmington, and like all attorneys, I'm going to give a long-winded answer. And happy to answer any questions as we go along. To start off with, let's just back up and say, what's going on here? Well, we know on November 8th, we voted to pass and legalize recreational use of marijuana. But what we also did that people may not be aware of is we also made changes to how medical marijuana is used, well not used, but perceived in the workplace. And so we know the laws are actually in effect today. We're still waiting on some final regs. But what does this mean for employers? There's some good news and there's some bad news. And at the end of the day, you're probably going to have to take some additional action. And so when it comes to recreational use, that's pretty straightforward. You can continue with your current policies that say drug-free workplace, can't come to work impaired. You can even go as far as saying if you test positive for drug use, I can fire you. But it's a little bit different when it comes to medical marijuana. And so what the law says is you can still say you can't come to work impaired. But where you may run into issues is with testing. The law is very clear that you cannot discriminate or negatively impact someone because they have a medical marijuana card. And so what that means from a practical standpoint is if you are looking to hire somebody and you don't have an exception, and under the law the exception is if you would not be able to receive federal funds or you would violate, let's say, a rule under DOT, then that's your exception and you don't have to worry about this. But if you don't fall under an exception, what that means is that if somebody were to use medical marijuana and you have them do a drug test, pre-application, and it comes back positive, your next step should be to say, hey look, your drug test came back positive for marijuana. Do you have a medical marijuana card? And if they say, yes, I do, and they can provide proof of that, then you can't, on its face, decide not to hire them because you'd be in violation of the law. Now, let's say you have a current employee and you don't fall underneath an exception, and that person shows up impaired for work. You believe that they are under the influence of marijuana, alcohol, etc. What you will need to do is make sure that you have evidence of the fact that they're impaired. And how you do that will probably be by training your HR staff managers and things like that. And there are others on the panel that can talk about and share, like Rocky, what their company does. So that's going to be your first step in making the file. But then let's say you make them submit to a drug test. Well, if it comes back positive and they have a medical marijuana card, now you're in trouble. Not in trouble, but you're going to have an uphill battle here, because we all know that drug tests are a little suspect, right? Because it's hard to show when somebody used marijuana. And under this new law, if you have a medical marijuana card and you tell your employer, I didn't use it on company property during work hours, I used it after hours. Well, if they're using it after hours and they have a medical marijuana card, then you can't do anything. And so those are some of the uphill battles that you guys are all going to have to face. I don't want to take too much more time, and I'm sure there will be follow-up questions, but there are some things that you are going to need to look at with your policies, procedures, and training programs.
See if we have a question about that. Go ahead.
Any questions? Yes.
Now, if you ask to see their medical marijuana card, does that violate RESPA? On a basis where if they were to complain?
So I don't know the answer to that officially, because you're in a catch-22, right? So it's almost like they have the burden to show that they have an exception or that they're in a protected class. Yes.
Just wondering or thinking in my mind, does that fall under any type of HIPAA protection as well when you move into the realms of protected medical information?
So I don't know the answer to that, because this is all new, and unfortunately we don't have precedents to look at. And if we look at other states, for example, Colorado, they define under the influence, where our regulations does not. And so we really are in a gray area, and unfortunately it's going to be a wait and see. But from my perspective, if I put on my litigator hat, the response is, well, you can't discriminate against somebody if you don't know, in fact, that they're protected. And so if you don't have the information that says, I have a medical marijuana card, then that's your defense for firing them.
Thank you.
Is there a place to find the form that says they cannot be impaired at work? Some kind of legal paper that says you cannot be impaired. What?
Policy procedure, be where you have that.
So
But
think
do
of
we
like,
write it ourselves, or is there some kind of form somewhere?
so,
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Rocky,
And what if you hire them, and then after you hire them, they get a medical card?
once they have the card, they have the card. You're not gonna be able to discriminate against that. If they are in the middle of, issue because of having a positive test, they can't get a card and say, okay, now I got it. That doesn't work. So, by the way, I'm Rocky. I'm the EHS for US Tool. I'm supposed to be Lindsay's supposed to be here, the HR person for us, but I ended up being the one that took over because Lindsay couldn't be here, unfortunately. But yes, policy and procedure. There are going to be tons of templates. You can go, whether it be your insurance carrier or whether it be any of your risk management with your insurance is always one of the best ways to start. Being a safety guy, that's what I do for everything. You should never have to reinvent the wheel. So that would be where I would start with that. Does that get you?
Yeah, except for the other thing, if you hire them, they don't have a medical card, and you don't want them to come to work impaired. Halfway through their, or 90-day probational period, they get a medical card, and then they're okay to.
Okay, that's an easy one. It really is. If you see reasonable suspicion of them being impaired, does it really matter if it's painkillers or if it's alcohol or drugs or whatever? Doesn't make any difference. Impairment is impairment. That is the best way I can describe for anybody dealing with a situation where it's visibly obvious there's some impairment. Having your staff trained to recognize those things is key to finding the answer of what to do with this situation. Our situation at US Tool, we have 2 people that have to have independent observation of what's going on, and they have their checklist of reasonable suspicion, and there's sometimes that it's way obvious. If I have someone that comes in and is inebriated, falls into the wall, and gets injured, I immediately have reasonable suspicion to start checking why did they fall into the wall whenever there was nothing in the floor, and slurred speech and all the obvious things. But impairment is impairment, so you would pursue it however. However, you do a drug screen, you find out it's marijuana, and now here's the card, you're done. Does that got you? Okay.
You can still
Yeah.
send them home, you just can't fire.
Or you can send them.
If they're impaired, yes, you can send them home, technically, yes. Somebody delivers them home, obviously. Liability, I'm the safety guy, sorry.
You can send them home even with a car.
Yes.
If they're impaired, they're impaired.
They're
What they did
impaired.
the night before.
So from,
You're fine, go ahead.
So, Lauren throws a little squishy. I can't help it, it's in my
I'm
nature.
shy.
So, and like Rocky said, if they're impaired, they're impaired. You cannot come to work impaired regardless of whether you have a medical marijuana card. That's grounds for firing somebody. What you have to do is make sure you've documented the file appropriately.
Even if they have like some kind of doctor's like thing saying like a certain amount, you know, what I'm saying?
So I
Like
was,
say that they have to do it in the morning for some kind of reason, like medical reasons, they can, and then they go come to work, or that's
so I'm gonna give you a general, no, I understand what you're asking, and I'm gonna make a general statement and then kind of dive into the specifics. So the law is pretty clear. It reserves the employer's right, regardless of whether you have a medical marijuana card or not, to say you can't come to work impaired, period. And so your policy should say you can't come to work impaired, or you're subject to discipline, including up to termination. And it ends there. Now, with your situation, maybe it's more fact specific, but it doesn't change the company's right to say impairment is impairment. Now, if it's unclear whether or not you're impaired and you're able to function and somebody objectively can't look and say you're impaired, then you're going to have an issue.
anybody else? Yes.
When there are questions asked, can the person please repeat the question back before the answer?
Yeah,
Will do.
absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else have another question? Okay.
So this one might be Kimber too. Can I still inquire about an applicant's criminal history on a job application?
Yes. You have that?
So, did everybody hear the question? The answer is yes, you can always inquire, but then it depends on what you do with that information. So we know under the new law that there's a process for expunging convictions related to marijuana. Of course, there are limitations associated with that, and we all know with the government, things takes time. So if you get a criminal background check back before expungement takes place and it relates to a minor offense, I would suggest that you talk to your outside counsel or your HR person. because you may or may not be able to do something with that. I would say if it should have been expunged, then don't look at it and ignore it, and pretend it didn't happen.
Any other questions about that? Anybody have any questions? Don't be shy. You're all here for the same thing. Yes.
So if a person does have their medical card, and, you know, obviously it's for medical reasons, they can take a diabetic pill in the morning, but they can't have the marijuana and it not be legal, or they can, if they're impaired at work. I don't know if that's coming across right, but if they're impaired at work, how do they?
You got that one? It's Alex.
Yeah, so I'm Alex, I'm owner of the Valley, the local dispensary in town, just so everybody knows. But so the question, I think it comes back to the impairment, like Kimber was saying, with your medical card, you can use the product, you just cannot show signs of impairment at work, right, or place of employment. So I think that's the difference, kind of like your question as well. Your employer can't prevent you from using the medicine that a doctor has okayed you to use. You just can't show it to your employer being impaired. So I think that's the difference.
Is there a static definition of what impairment entails, or is that something that can vary from business to business or type of job description?
Not that I'm aware of, and as far as the state of Missouri goes too, with the recreational rules, so this bill just passed, we voted on it November 8th. It did start to take effect, like the possession, you can legally possess. We have not started selling recreational marijuana, and they're still in the process of writing the rules, and there are definitions coming out with that. Sorry, you hear me?
Can you repeat the question for the microphone each time?
Yeah, sorry.
I have a question. So people are thinking they're using medical marijuana, they have to be impaired. Is that, I mean, if you use it in the morning, are you necessarily impaired? Or is it like you drink a beer, you're not drunk, like?
Right. Yeah, so the question is about impairment. I guess if you take a hit of a joint or you eat a gummy, if every person is impaired after doing that, is that the question? Yeah, so I think people that are lifelong users or have used for 20, 30 years, tolerance levels come into play. And I mean, there's people that use constantly throughout the day, hourly, that you would never know that they're consuming a product. Then there's others that it can be as little as, one hit of a joint or 5 milligrams of a gummy, and they might show signs of impairment. So just a case by case and different body types.
And I want to be clear, because I know this comes down to semantics, but it's important. And so you cannot, if your employer has a policy in place that says you cannot use drugs or alcohol while at work or et cetera, it comes down to they can't show up under the influence of marijuana, period. But from a practical standpoint, the reason why we're talking about impaired is because you have to be able to prove that they in fact are under the influence. And so that's why we're using the term impaired. And so I just want to make that distinction. Your policy can have a zero tolerance, but then it comes back to how do you implement and prove that they're in violation of that policy.
Go ahead, Angela.
Brock mentioned something about having a checklist or sheet of questions like proof impairment. Is that something that you get from somewhere? Because again, you have to prove that. That can be kind of hard. Just, I saw them doing this. You want to make sure you have proper documentation, correct?
Just lie.
Just
The question was.
That's why he's number 2.
That was number 2 choice. The question is there a checklist or something that makes it really easy to figure out? This is what you have that says you are impaired. So the one that we have, it existed before I joined US Tool, but I can tell you if you get education, whether it be hiring someone like ODAX or some kind of drug testing facility, even I'm sure even hospital may have somebody that's an authority on being able to recognize all the different signs and symptoms of different influences, whether it be alcohol or marijuana or whatever. They're going to be able to help you, and a lot of it's very obvious stuff, slurred speech, eyes are fixed and dilated, or whatever the cause is. Like the one I was talking about earlier, if they're staggering and then they fall into the wall, that's a pretty easy one to pick. If they are not operating machinery properly, then we start falling into, I'm going after to look and see, why did that machine crash? And then I start really zoning in on the person, recognizing they normally don't ever have a problem. Today they do. Those are the kind of things that stand out, and then you can document that. If you got two people that are trained in it, that can go through and do the documentation, then you say, okay, we got reasonable suspicion, we got a couple people that agree they seen very similar things, and they witnessed it, so now you have that to go with. Sure.
Would personality changes fall under what you're talking about? A dramatic difference from one day to the next?
Yeah, well, the question is, if personality's part of the suspicion checklist. Yes, it is. There's all sorts of things, whether it is physical as far as actions or just behavior. All of those things. It's things we've all seen, whether it be on TV or whether in person. It's going to be all those different gamut of possibilities of what changes could be. Yes?
I'm just wondering, like, so ultimately, if my eyes are red and I'm not focusing or something's different, and you thought I was under the influence, but I said I have allergies severely and I took allergy medication. How do you vote? How do you, like, can you fight that at all? I mean.
So it's gonna go back to the impairment part, or any kind of reasonable suspicion. So just because your eyes are red, is there something else that really catches personality change? Whether you're feeling wired or whether you're really sluggish about your behavior from what you typically are.
Right, so if I said I took allergy medicine and it made me sluggish, are you really gonna be able to prove it, or are they just gonna be able to fight it and you're out of luck?
That's gonna be totally about who's checking. If you don't have reasonable suspicion on that checklist, if it's not there, it's not there. So yeah, if I ask you questions like we have, and obviously HR is gonna be involved if I'm asking questions because they don't want me let loose. You're gonna have that conversation. This is what we've seen, blah, blah, blah. And if they're willing to go, no problem. I'll give you an example. We had someone that was accused at a place that they had the person, whenever they were confronted, said, sure, I'll go. I mean, it was no doubt in their mind they were going to be fine. They went and did a screen, everything was fine. So in that case, it makes it really simple. If they're going to be a little agitated about things, I'd probably back off unless you got some solid things that say, well, you did X, Y, Z things. Just because their eyes are rosy, I'm not going to get too excited. Because it does happen. I'm one of them.
That's positive though, at that point, I could have said, you know, I smoked pot a week ago, it's still gonna show up on the drug test, and let me have impaired at work. I was just thinking it.
If there's impairment, you're going to recognize an impairment. I mean, you're talking about, I got rosy eyes, now you're looking at me suspiciously. I got nothing that I'm going to be able to come up with after that. Is that cool? Yes?
What if it's post-accident and not reasonable suspicion, and then they show you a medical?
I've got you. So post-accident, policy is policy. Never change what you want to do for policy. If it is an accident, what's your policy say? If it's a immediate drug screen after an accident, you don't back down from that. I know a lot of people get a little nervous about it, but I'm going to tell you, we've been doing it for years. It doesn't mean that it's correct. but I go to a lot of safety conferences, and obviously risk management is one of the things that I focus with. And policy is policy. If you have an immediate test within 24 hours of the event, keep doing that test. If it shows up, and we go back to the original thing that I said, if it goes that all they have is marijuana in their system, and they say, got the card, there's no more that you're gonna go after. With Missouri, if you have proof of an impairment or anything that's in their system during that time, you can get up to a 50% reduction. I'm stealing your thunder.
No, no.
Okay. You can get up to a 50% reduction in settlement. So whenever you go into your reasonable suspicion or post-accident response, if you see that they were under the influence or could have been under the influence of anything outside of marijuana, then you got them. But at the same time, if it's marijuana, then you've got the card that is variable. But if you switch over from manufacturing or any other type of business, if you get into DOT doesn't have any tolerance. They didn't change anything when it comes to marijuana. It doesn't matter if you have a card or not. If you are under Department of Transportation, you're not able to partake. Yes?
So, say that you test an existing employee, and they test positive, and they show you their card. Is there anything preventing the employer from saying, like, we're definitely not firing you for the marijuana, we're firing you for something else? Is there anything for that?
You better have really good documentation, that's all I can tell you. The question was, if you see a positive test and you want to dismiss that person, can you fire them for something else? I mean, being really honest, how many places have you been where there are people that could be focused on if you wanted to eliminate them? But documentation. Anybody else? Sure.
I got one pipe for the store.
Okay.
Well, hold on just a second. Right behind you, in the blue, you have a question for?
Yeah, I had a question. Your alcohol, I mean, your blood alcohol, if you've got a medical marijuana card, are there different degrees of percentage in your blood that would be surpass what the card allows?
This may be you too.
I know.
So the difference between having a blood alcohol content versus marijuana, the problem comes into play. There is no solid test that says you have XYZ amount of marijuana in your system. And there are some states that are toying with different methods of saying this is a level of impairment or a possible impairment. The police obviously have to have something. If they pull someone over because of erratic driving or whatever, they have to have some kind of a field test that tells them. They have those kind of things, but it is not rock solid evidence because based on body mass, based on just the fat content and all the different variables from one person to the next, you can have two.
Wants to give you a drug test and you test positive, yet we are a recreational state, so according to state law, you can purchase and consume, but it still goes back to your employer's policies on that. The state law, exactly, yeah, the state law changing is not going to protect you to consume, and I mean, a medical card in that situation, I think would help you out, but just to say, well, it's legal in the state of Missouri, or even say I was in Colorado last week and it's legal out there, the state laws are not really what we can go by as far as that goes.
Well, I'm sure workers' council had a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
There's two questions. You have something else to add to that statement?
Yes.
Okay.
This-
And then we'll be fixed.
You were saying work comp has something to say about it. That's the problem. We're still stuck in that we don't know. So it goes back to flash the card. It's a get out of jail free If you have no drug policies, then obviously you have some teeth to go back after the situation and go back to what I was talking about, or a reduction in settlement or whatever comes back with that. But right now, until we have a solid, you have this much in your system and this is impairing you to X level, we won't have a lot of teeth outside of they got the card or they don't. Now, as far as policies go, we have a policy that if there's anything in their system, we can give them two options basically. They can accept the fact that they have it in their system and they can elect to terminate employment with us on their own, or they have the other option that they would have to get a clean drug screen on their own at our testing facilities on their own dollar, and then after that they are agreeing to be subject to up to 6 months of random drug testing at their expense, and then they also have to sign up for the employee assistance program. So it's a big demand if you still want to stay employed.
And you had questions?
Yeah, my question would be for the young man here. You know, you said you recommended people get that medical card for an extra layer of protection or whatever. So these cards are easy to get. Literally anybody can get.
So the question is about obtaining a medical card. Are they easy to get? The answer is yes. The list of qualifying conditions you can find on DHSS's website, but it's broad. I mean, anything from insomnia to I have back pain or neck pain is enough. So yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of the process for obtaining the card at a high level, whether or not you can do a video conference with a doctor, things like that, just to show the ease?
Yeah, so the process of getting your medical card is fairly simple. You don't have to go to a doctor's appointment or meet with a doctor in person. A lot of it's done through telemedicine. So you would just simply call the doctor and set up a video conference over the phone. It's roughly about $100. The doctor approves you, the paperwork's filed with the state, and within a week or two, you're approved.
3 years.
Yeah, and now medical cards are good for 3 years. Originally, when the program started, medical cards had to be renewed every year, so it was just an extra cost that the patients had to pay for. But with the passing of Amendment 3, medical cards are now good for 3 years.
Didn't they drop the cost of the medical cards too? I think I read that.
There's different costs. Doctors charge different amounts. I mean, I've seen everywhere from 75 to like 175. So there's not just one straight fee. There is a fee with the department, the filing fee, maybe that dropped.
I think it went from $100 to $60. So you have your doctor's fee, and then you have the fee, the filing fee is dropped.
Correct.
Yep, it's went down. Chris Morrison, question?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so on the other side of this, you have a workforce issue, right? Like people can't find enough employees. So like, are there any tips or like things, you can't just say no to everyone if this becomes mainstream and everyone's doing it. So are there maybe tips to how to approach it as an employer to hire people, you know, like things to look for, just to be knowledgeable on it?
Yeah, so tips on hiring as far as to avoid people that consume marijuana, or tips for how to hire. I mean, marijuana, everybody has their own opinions of it. I do think it's changing slowly, but it's not just the stereotype of a pothead or somebody that sits around. I mean, the customers that we see that are, you know, really truly using it for medical purposes are from every walk of life. A lot of veterans, teachers, retired cops, I mean, all sorts. So the stereotype of just potheads is, you know, being worked on. But as far as that, yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously the people that I'm hiring are consumers. I know that going in. So it's a little different from my perspective. hiring. I want them to consume, obviously. I don't want somebody in there that has an issue.
You also want to have good customer service and all these other things that we're all looking for, so you're probably a great example of being able to hire someone who uses.
Yeah, right. Well, and I mean, if you check the reviews on Google, I think you would find all that. With my employees, a lot of great customer service reviews. I mean, they're good people. They consume marijuana, but they're not impaired on the job. You know, obviously we have our own policies on that. And we haven't had any issues thus far at our place of employment, so.
Everybody talks about employee stress.
Yeah, employee stress. We still don't, advise them to use on the job, but, yeah. Yeah, Sue?
So my husband used to be a federal employee, and he used to tell me that this whole marijuana thing, that if you were a federal employee, it didn't make any difference because it's not a federal law across the United States. So how does it work? And he's been out of there for a couple of years. So how does if you're a federal employee and you have a medical marijuana, is that still, you can still use that, everything's fine with that, or because it's not a federal law, even though it's legal now in Missouri, how does that work, do you know?
Yeah, so the question's about,
Really quick.
yeah, the implications of a federal employee using marijuana under state law. I'd say he's correct. I mean, if you have a federal job, yeah, it's federally illegal. So if you're regulated or employed by the feds, then yeah, you would not be able to consume marijuana. I wouldn't recommend that.
Correct also, if you're employed by someone who receives federal funding, if your employer receives Medicaid and it's matched with a percentage of federal funding, which I think most of it is, then you can't use marijuana. They'll pull your funding, and the information we've just recently gotten said that if they catch you allowing someone to work, they will not only make you pay the money back that person say you're nurse practitioner. They'll make you pay back whatever you owe to the employee, but they'll also jerk your federal funding forever. It's not one time, and there's not one instance where you pay a fine.
Sister, you're covering it. Go ahead.
So again, it really puts a lot of employers in direct care services at disadvantage. If you can go somewhere over here and work as a McDonald's. Yeah, if you can work at McDonald's for $18 an hour, and I need you to come and prepare meals for a client that gets Medicaid that pays you, and it's matched money from the state and federal government, I can't compete, because I can't hire you regardless if I want to or not.
You are correct. Does everybody catch that, or what do you need? The other thing I wanted to point out is with the hiring people, going along the lines of, does anybody have any problem finding staff? With that, as far as hiring someone with a we do a post-offer pre-employment test. We do the drug screen at hire. If there's marijuana in their system, you really can't discriminate from that. Unfortunately, if you're in a situation, I need an employee, but I have federal funding, then that's you're quick, I can't hire you.
I got one. You got one more? Well, yeah, just one little thing about just like drug screens. We are seeing that states that are recreational states that pass recreational marijuana to make it legal, that certain employers are removing the marijuana test from drug screening. We've seen that here and in other states, and so I think that's kind of what makes the most sense that we'll maybe see more of, is that you'll still have your same drug policies, your same drug testing procedures, But if you're in a recreational state and it's legal, they're just removing the THC from that. And even in some situations with a medical card, they will just remove it from those specific people. So, yeah.
I was just wondering what percentage of states roughly are recreationally allowable versus?
Yes, I think we were number 25 to be recreational or medical. I think we're like the 20th, maybe correct, but yeah, there's just over half that have one or the other, medical or recreational.
Thank you.
Are we aware of any kind of a push by the federal government to say, let's make this, when you have to get to the point where you have half of your states that have allowed it to be legal and recreational, when are you gonna switch over to the side where everyone's treated fairly? That's something I see that our politicians need to work for.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my thought is that now that we're over half, that, the federal government should be looking into it a little more. I'm not aware of any specific push, but I know, for the last 20 years, there's been certain lobbyists, working on that, but who knows?
Okay, so in the interest of time, we still have some things we have to do to finish today. So we're gonna put the video, we'll have lots of information. I'm even gonna try to see if I get some information from ODAX and some of the other places that do drug testing, see if they can give us some idea. Would you all have something you can share with us about like how you do that impairment, the training you have? Like, could you share that information?
No, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll get that loaded too. So we'll try to have as much information as possible on the chamber website and in the newsletter. And like I said, if you're not part of the newsletter, you can go to the farmingtonregionalchamber.com webpage and you can join the newsletter, subscribe there. So I'm gonna give the floor back to Candy. She's got a little bit of business we gotta take care of, and then you're able to speak with these fine people that were our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.